She's rolling on right to my front porch. The record player's broken on the floor. And then Miss Odell, I can tell you nothing new has happened since I last saw you. I'm the only one down here who's got nothing to say about the hip or the dope or the cat with most hope, the billboard. That person shoving, ringing on my bell. It's not for me tonight, why don't you come? Miss Odell, why don't you call me Miss Odell? Austin 6922.
Welcome to the Friends of Dan Music Podcast. I'm Dan Miles. Today we're going to be talking about a fascinating book entitled Miss Odell, My Long Days and Hard Nights with the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Bob Dylan, Eric Clapton, and the Women They Loved. Joining me now on the phone from just down the I-10 in Tucson, Arizona, is the author of the book, Chris Odell. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Dan.
Thanks for being with us.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Most of us will never know what it's like to walk into a bookstore and see our life story for sale. What's it been like to suddenly attain a degree of fame after living for so long in anonymity?
You know, it has its good, well, I don't know how fame it is. It's sometimes infamous is probably the better word. You know, some days it's wonderful, and there are other times when I think, oh, you know, but it has given me very good insight into what all the people I was hanging out with all those years went through.
The book starts in 1968 when you went to work for the Beatles in London at Apple at the age of 20, and you go into plenty of detail about how that all came about. But I'd like to jump ahead to the day when you had the audacity to invite yourself to a Beatles recording session. Did you surprise yourself when you asked Paul if you could come to a session?
You know, I don't think so. I think that's always kind of been a part of me. It doesn't seem so outrageous at the moment. Somehow I justify it in my head that it's the only sensible thing to do. And I think I did that day. I figured, well, here I am, all the way here in London. The Beatles are recording. I'm working at Apple. You know, isn't that sensible? You know, it just seemed like the right thing. Plus, you never miss an opportunity.
Well, I'll bet everybody there was wanting to do it and thinking about it, and they just didn't have your nerve.
They did not have the, what do they call it, the pushiness, American pushiness.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Do you think the fact that you're an American and they were English was a factor in that?
Oh, yeah. The people who worked there, you know, were sort of trained not to do that. That was kind of an understood, that one of those unspoken rules amongst the Brian Epstein people, and I just didn't know that. So, you know, had I known, I probably wouldn't have, but at that point, I figured I am about to have some experiences, and I better go for everyone I can get because I didn't know how long I was going to be there.
Well, from your account, the impression I get is that the immediate reaction from everyone else in the office was, "Oh my God, I can't believe she did that." So.
Yeah, exactly. Like, we're not supposed to do that, really? I didn't know that.
Well, he said you could come, and this was during the White Album when they seemed to be getting more relaxed about that long-standing closed session policy. Do you think the presence of Yoko actually helped you gain access to the studio?
You know, I don't actually think it was that relaxed yet. She was one of the only women who went, who was there certainly all the time, you know, with the Beatle crowd. But I don't think it was that relaxed yet. It was, I mean, I generally was one of the only people there when I would go by, the outside people. So, you know, occasionally people who worked at Apple, Neil, Derek Taylor, occasionally people like that would go by, but it still wasn't open-door policy by any stretch of the imagination. So I don't know that Yoko made a difference. I think, you know, I think in some ways, because of Apple and being associated with Apple, it just made it, they knew me.
Well, when people read your account of that incident, it wasn't like you just waltzed in there either. It was hard for you. You almost didn't make it in.
Yeah, exactly. The wiles. No, I almost didn't make it in. Had it been left to Mal Evans, who was the gatekeeper, I wouldn't have been in there that night. But fortunately, one of John's friends, Pete, came by and whisked me in.
Well, you were at the session when they recorded the sing-along refrain at the end of Hey Jude, and Paul personally invited you to participate. Are you able to listen to that song today without thinking about that session?
I'm not really sure. I think that I love that song, and it always makes me feel really good. And of course, I have a picture of what it was like when we were recording it. I still have the memory in my mind, but I don't know that it's one of those songs that goes, I was there. That there are songs that do that. That isn't particularly what makes me notice that song. What I noticed is what a great song it is.
That's what I was wondering, because if you listen to any of the songs where you weren't present, you don't have any image in your mind of the session, but since you were at the session, I was just wondering if sometimes you listen to that end part without even thinking of you being there.
There's certain things that you develop over time being around that environment, like, it's hard to separate yourself sometimes from, once you know these people and work for them, it's hard to listen to the music and separate yourself from it because you have opinions and relationships with these people, and it can make it very difficult to just hear the music, and that's probably one of the negative things of all of it, is that you lose that objectivity to the music somewhat.
Those sessions are known for the band members weren't getting along as well and working by themselves more. Did you detect any of that during sessions?
I didn't really notice during those early days of the White Album that they weren't getting along, but they definitely would be in the studio. They'd be in together, and then there'd be days when there was just one of them, when they were specifically putting something on track that only needed the one of them, like George's vocal or, something like that. But I didn't really feel the tension at that point. I was new to the scene. But of course later I did, once it became pretty apparent that there was tension.
You gave a really detailed account of that Savoy Truffle vocal session and described it as sort of a much more intimate experience than I would have thought listening to that song, because the song isn't have that late night kind of vibe to it at all.
No, I know. Well, I was the one who couldn't handle it.
Well, how it turned out, which people can read about, isn't really what I remember about it. It was just the image of George singing and the tea if you drinking the wine, and it's just now whenever I hear that song, I just have a completely different picture in my head. You were also at the rooftop concert, sitting with Maureen Starkey, among others, and she famously let out a cheer Paul acknowledged with "Thanks, Mo." Have you ever thought that if you had just cheered a little harder, he might have said "Thanks, Chris" instead?
No, I never thought that. I was trying to be inconspicuous that day, so the last thing I would have done is drawn attention to myself. I was an employee, and employees weren't supposed to be up there, so I was like kind of being very quiet and careful.
And just thankful to be there. It sounds like if it wasn't for Ken Mansfield, you wouldn't have been there.
Actually, it wasn't Ken. It was the cameraman who said, "Come on, I need an assistant." So I just sat down next to the camera, and then Ken came out, and then Maureen, and then Yoko.
Right place and right time. Because you had said that they had spent about a week trying to reinforce the roof, because, I've been on roofs of homes that I've owned, and it's true, if you're going to put a band up there and film equipment and a bunch of people, they're really not designed to hold all that weight.
They're not, and that building was already getting some structural problems, so it was, on top of it, there really were structural problems there. I think they eventually gutted that building.
Well, imagine if the roof would have caved in and the whole band fell through. What a great scene that would have made, hopefully with no injuries.
God, we would have landed somewhere like on the third floor, all laying there. And it would have been headlines again.
How many stories was that building?
In American stories, it was 5. In English stories, it was 4. I had a hard time writing the book because I had to keep changing that, because I always thought of my office on the 4th floor, but in fact, it was on the 5th floor by American count.
So the first floor, they don't count. The
first floor is the ground floor.
Okay, and then the second floor, they call it the first floor. The
first floor, right. And then there's the basement, so 6 floors.
Well, you were responsible for booking recording sessions for Apple artists like James Taylor, Billy Preston, Doris Troy, Mary Hopkin, Jackie Lomax, and Badfinger. And you also attended a lot of them. Was it part of your job to go, or did you just do it for fun?
Both. I mean, it wasn't part of my job necessarily to be there, but, I'd go over to make sure everything was okay. And then, I was living in a foreign country, and I was 21 years old, and, I didn't have a lot to do. If you can go to a recording session at night, why not?
Right, well, I figured if you booked a session, it would make sense to show up, make sure everything was as promised, but then to actually stay and listen to the work, I would do it if I was allowed to, just for the fun. So your answer is about what I expected you to say.
Yeah, it was nice. It was fun to be there.
And they made some great recordings, and if you have the chance of spending the evening watching James Taylor or Doris Troy record or Billy Preston, are you going to do that, or are you going to go hang out with the ordinary people doing ordinary things, huh?
At the pub.
At the pub. Well, one of the more unusual assignments that they gave you involved making a personal delivery to Bob Dylan. What did you deliver to him, and how did you get there?
His harmonicas. He forgot his harmonicas. It was the first time that he was playing in, 2-3 years or something in public. And he got down to the Isle of Wight and realized he didn't have any harmonicas. So George and Patty, who were staying there, called up and asked myself and somebody else to bring some harmonicas with us. So we actually, the harmonicas were going to go on a helicopter, and we figured we might as well go with them. So we landed in the farmhouse, in the backyard of the farmhouse with Bob's harmonicas.
So basically the assignment was get in the chopper and take these harmonicas to Bob Dylan because he forgot to bring his.
Yes, that was kind of that's it in a nutshell.
And then, of course, after the Isle of Wight concert, you flew back to London in a small plane with John and Yoko.
Right.
And hit some turbulence, and for a while you guys were genuinely afraid the plane might go down.
I was scared to death. We were high. We were smoking pot, though, which didn't help.
No, and you were worried the pilot must be getting it because the plane was so small.
Yeah, just pot paranoia.
Well, what I found more amusing about being afraid of the pilot getting high was how you consoled yourself with the thought that if you did die, at least you'd be famous because of the company you were
I'd
with.
be on the front page. That was a very important thing to remember. Well, if I die, at least I'll be on the front page. John Lennon, Yoko Ono, and 2 Apple employees die.
Do you think that Buddy Holly might have crossed John's mind since his demise was in a plane and he was John's idol? Do you remember any specific comments he or Yoko made during that crisis?
We just all chanted Hare Krishna. That's the only thing that anybody said.
Well, I guess it worked.
Yeah. Well, I'm still here.
Those are the type of stories I really enjoyed about your book, because they're not the ones I've heard different versions about Hell's Angels visiting Apple and some of the other stories you told from your point of view, but this story I'd never heard.
Oh, no. Well, there were only 4 or 5 of us on that flight, so...
And you probably didn't want to talk about it afterwards, just put it behind you.
It's those stories you just don't talk about unless you decide to write a book.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you did. It's fun to read. You met Leon Russell at Apple, who ended up writing not 1, but 2 songs about you. First was Pisces Apple Lady, which George and Ringo both played on, and second was Hummingbird. I know you were in the studio when he recorded Pisces Apple Lady. What about Hummingbird?
Yeah, I was also in the studio in L.A. when he recorded that. And Delaney and Bonnie Bramlett both sang on the chorus, the going out chorus on that.
Do you have a preference between the 2 of them? You like them equally, or they're like your children? Or
I think Hummingbird was a much nicer song, but Pisces Apple Lady was, that was a turning point for me in terms of my relationship with him.
Well, just as a musician, to me, I like Pisces Apple Lady better lyrically, and I like Hummingbird better musically.
Huh, that's interesting.
But that's just my own take on it.
Huh, interesting.
But yeah, it must be flattering to have those songs out there in the public, and he doesn't mention you by name, so I guess you could just keep it to yourself if you wanted to.
Yeah, well, Pisces Apple Lady is a little easier to identify, if you know anything about me, but the thing is, I know. And once it's out there, it's like the internet. Once it's there, you can't take it away.
Yeah, and Leon Russell might not have been at the same level as the Beatles. Nobody was, but he's still, one of the greats.
Yeah.
And his catalog is going to be listened to for a long time.
your bottle go down and see you prayer. You know what to do, Lordy, when you tell her how bad it's been. You say you want to get away to the English countryside. But cry won't help you now, boy. Why don't you look how many tears you cry? When I got down to Chelsea, I have no expectations. Oh, to get away from the Delta Grill and the painful situation. But I hardly had a time, oh, to laugh and look around. And I found my heart was going again like the English leaps and bounds. And she's a bad up lady, when just beats softly. Swing, she really got herself together. Oh, yeah. Bad up lady, you took me by surprise. And I put her to 100 pieces. I better right before the ride. Now we're together all the way to LA. I know that you love me 'cause she can brighten up a smoky day. If I believed in marriage, oh, I'd take her for my wife. And move on down into high gear, baby, for the rest of my natural life. She's a Brazil apple lady, and when she speaks softly, she screams. She really got herself together. Yeah, she does. She's a Brazil apple lady, she took me by surprise, and I fell into 100 pieces. I said right before the ride. Well, she's a Brazil apple lady, and when she speaks softly, screams. She really got herself together. Yeah, she does. Just a Brazil apple lady, she took me by surprise, and I fell into 100 pieces. Oh, sometimes I get impatient, but she cools me without words. She comes so sweet and softly, my hummingbird. And had you heard that I thought my life had ended, and I find that it's just begun. 'Cause she gets me where I live, I'll give her all I have to give. I'm talking about that hummingbird. Just a little and I love her too much words to say. When I see her in the morning sleeping, yeah, she little and she loves me too, my lucky day. Hummingbird, don't fly away. Oh, yeah. When I'm feeling wild and lonesome, she knows the words to say. She gives me understanding. a special way. And I feel like I have to say, in my life I love no other. Yes, she's more than I deserve.